From the Foundation Studio right here on Biloxi's Back Bay, I want to welcome you to SuperTalk Outdoors, where we celebrate every single Monday at lunchtime the world-class outdoors of the state of Mississippi, because Mississippi is the capital of the outdoors in America. I want to thank you for joining us on the powerful SuperTalk Mississippi Radio Network or on SuperTalk TV at C Spire TV. But some of you are watching on YouTube or Facebook or listening on your favorite podcast. With that said, it's January the 15th, 2024. Hey, listen, while I'm at this point of how people engage this show, so many people engaging with this show in so many different ways, we want to be available to everybody however and whenever you want to engage with us. But I really appreciate the phenomenal feedback we get from the show. I mean, radio's king. A lot of you are in your trucks right now, driving between duck holes, or you're headed back to you're headed to lunch to take a break from hunting. But you engage in the show because we have such incredible guests, and we have such a passion for conservation in this state. And, I can say that as we go forward, you're going to even see more passion from me as it relates to how we're managing this resource. Is everyone aligned in this state around protecting the North American wildlife model? And are they focused on what science is telling us about how we ought to manage that resource? It has to do with our conservation efforts. It also has to do with how we approach our management of diseases. We're going to be talking more about that as we go forward. I want you to know that my views are mine, not those of the foundation, the sponsor of the show. And I always say this, but I think it's really important. My voice is independent. So when it comes to outdoors and outdoors issues, you can count on me to say what needs to be said, and I am really honored to be in that position. Listen, we've had a series of great shows recently. Last week, we had a terrific show focused on ducks. Everybody's talking about ducks because we're right in the middle of the duck season. And here we are this week with some really fundamentally cold air happening. Maybe that will deliver some new ducks to this area. But I've been looking forward to this next conversation with my friend Ed Penny, who's the Director of Public Policy for the Southern Region for Ducks Unlimited, and someone I've enjoyed working with on conservation issues and have a lot of respect for. And Ed's going to be joining me for the full show today. So anyway, without any further ado, let me welcome Ed back to SuperTalk Outdoors. How you doing, Ed?
Great, Ricky. Good morning to you. Great to be back on the show. I appreciate all that you're saying and all that you're doing for the state of Mississippi, because we are the capital of the outdoors.
We are the capital of the outdoors. I often say that I'll stand toe-to-toe with anybody from any other state and have that debate with them. And they may win on elk and they may win on mule deer. I'm going to win on white-tailed deer and turkey and red fishing and speckled trout fishing and, yellowfin fishing. I mean, well, I'll have that debate with anybody who wants to have that debate. But we're so lucky to be in this state. And I know you have such a great perspective because you live here, but you have responsibilities. I think it's like 7 states. Is that right? Did I remember that correctly?
Almost double that. So I have 13 states in the southern region for Ducks Unlimited. That covers New Mexico to Virginia.
Yeah. Okay. Well, man, thank you for reminding me. I did not remember that correctly, but that gives you such a great perspective on the duck situation. And, there's no rest for the weary in your world, is there?
There's not. I mean, waterfowl management, waterfowl conservation covers so much. And it is complex. It is extremely sophisticated. It takes a lot of work by a lot of folks. Ducks Unlimited is a leader. That's why I love working for DU. But there are so many other folks and partners involved in it.
So, what do you do this time of year? Do you see the your work come to fruition? Do you get to do some duck hunting yourself? Are you planning? What's it look like in your world?
Waterfowl conservation never stops. I'm the policy person here in the South, so my calendar kind of tracks legislative sessions around the states. It tracks what's happening in D.C. at the federal level. So there's a little bit of a break between Christmas and Martin Luther King Day weekend, even though we're still planning for sessions incoming. But it does slow down a little bit around Christmas, and I am able to enjoy getting out in the field with friends and legislators and folks that we work with in the ground and in capitals around the states.
I mentioned this last Monday, but I had the opportunity to lease some farms in the Mississippi Delta. And it's been interesting watching the duck situation very closely. And there's been a lot written more recently. It's so complex. I mean, there are some people that want it to be just this, just about weather, or just about what happens up the Mississippi Flyway, or any number of other things. I mean, it's a very, very, very complex thing. A lot of things have been written about it. But in one of the duck holes that my son and my friends, I hunt, I would do a couple of hunts a year. I'm not a rabid duck hunter like a lot of my friends are. They are absolutely obsessed with it. And I get why. I mean, one of my funnest duck hunts was last year at this place, Gadwall Landing, that my friends own. And it was toward the end of last year. And it was my son Jordan and my best friend Terry Waldrop and I, and we just laughed. I mean, we first of all, we laughed because the ducks were flying so good, the views were amazing. We had a wonderful duck hunt. The camaraderie was amazing. It was a great reminder to me that when you're duck hunting, as I said with you many times, it's the ultimate social sport. But again, the scenery and to contemplate the ducks that you're looking at right now are migratory for the most part, and where they came from and how they got there, and the great variety that we had the opportunity to shoot. I just love that. But I don't have to do it every weekend. I enjoy taking grandkids and nephews deer hunting. So I like to spend time at a deer stand with them. And so that's kind of my thing. But listen, this year they've had some great duck hunts. I mean, gadwall and wood ducks and green and blue winged teal, and a few widgeons, in the mix. A couple of mallards, certainly not like the mallards like they were in the past, but they've had some good duck hunts. But I know that their experience and those duck hunts that they've been on have been few and far between. The reality is, it's been a slow season for the most part. We can attribute a lot of that to the fact that, as Ramsey Russell pointed out last week, on Christmas Day in Alberta, it was 54 degrees. And I mean, when you hear that, you realize that standing snow, frozen water, and very cold temperatures are what usually brings the ducks down. None of that existed this year. So it's, when you combine that to all the other things, the changes in migratory patterns and so many other characteristics that are part of the description for why the duck hunting is a little bit changed over the years. It's been a tough duck season, hasn't it?
It has been a tough duck season, and there's no denying it. And, I'm not going to make any excuses on why it's been a tough duck season, but the key point is to control what we can control. We can't control the weather. We can't control what happens in other states here in Mississippi. And we can talk about the habitat that we have here, the lack thereof. And we can talk about the habitat or lack thereof in Canada and in the breeding grounds in the Dakotas. So some of those things we can control, but the weather is one thing we cannot. And unfortunately, as Ramsey eloquently put it, in Alberta, if it's 54 degrees, there's no ice and no snow. And where they should be playing pond hockey on prairie potholes, they're wide open or dry. So there's no denying that, and no excuses made there. But it has been a tough duck season, and I've been a witness to it. I've had a couple quality hunts, and I zeroed yesterday in the state of Mississippi. So it's been tough.
Well, what's interesting is that what happens when it's complex, and it is complex, and we'll get into some of those complexities before we get done with our conversation today. But when it's complex, what happens is people tend to lean toward the easiest description of the problem. The problem is this. The problem is they're feeding them too much up in the north, and it's causing them to stop short of getting to our areas. Some would describe it as the migratory. There's been a migratory shift. Some say west, some say east, some say dispersed. But you look at the data, and there's certainly some suggestion that a lot of that may be happening. Some say it has to do with, especially as it relates to mallards, because the data that's coming out around this is beginning to get pretty compelling. That farm-raised mallards have breeded with migratory mallards, and when that happens, you've got a duck that doesn't want to migrate anymore. So that's an issue. it's a lot about habitat, and the need for habitat enhancement. A lot of farming operations where there used to be wetlands, and this is all the way up the flyway. Anyway, at the end of the day, it's extraordinarily complex, and so it's hard to say it's one thing, isn't it?
It is. It's not one thing, but I can say that most of our problems are connected to habitat, and that's Ducks Unlimited's mission, is to conserve habitat. Our number one priority is not the state of Mississippi. Our number one priority is the prairie pothole region, because that's where our ducks come from. But the lower Mississippi Valley, of which Mississippi and the Delta are part, that is a continental level 1 priority for Ducks Unlimited across the entire continent.
Well, that's a pretty compelling statement to make when you think about the resources and the leadership role you can play in directing resources. That's a pretty compelling statement to make. We'll start to kind of break it all down as we continue our conversation here after this break with Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited. We see you after this break. Welcome back to SuperTalk Outdoors as we continue to converse with my friend Ed Penny, who is a really important leader in DU for the southern region, has a very large area that he has to say grace over, but he gets an opportunity to get a lot of data, some of that anecdotal, some of that hard data, but you've got really important stakeholders and partners that you work with. One is Heath Hagee, who's the project leader for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's National Wildlife Refuge System. But those kind of partnerships are really important to you guys, aren't they, Ed?
They are, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service manages land through the refuge system, but they also do a lot of scientific data collection on migratory birds. One of the most important things is the Maze survey. That's where they count breeding ducks or estimate breeding ducks. That's where they estimate May ponds or actual pothole numbers. Then they also support the states like Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks in doing the midwinter survey. So they're actually counting ducks during the winter, usually early February, early January.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. What's interesting, they're just one example. They're able to capture and coordinate the collection of a lot of data. But if you think about biologists across North America that are focused on ducks, there's a lot of research that's been going on around what their migration patterns are by species, where they come from, where they're going, over a bunch of years, man. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And what's emerged as a result of collecting that data have been some pretty clear pictures about certain species and what's up with those species. I mean, that's you guys are seeing that as well, right?
Right. And those surveys, particularly in the prairies, they've been going on since the mid-50s. And we have to maintain those because those do support our current hunting season frameworks, bag limits, all the hunting management that the Fish and Wildlife Service and the states do. So we have to maintain data collection. But we are seeing declines. I mentioned to you off the air that there's been a decline in mallard breeding population numbers of about 50% since 2015. So that's being observed, that's being seen by duck hunters in the blind, and that's one reason we're having poor success this year.
So let's zero in on mallards for just a second, because this whole notion of short stopping, we'll describe to people what that is. That's part of the answer. You just mentioned just a few minutes ago that the breeding population has reduced by 50%. That's significant, actually. Especially when you factor in to all the weather conditions and all the other aspects. But short stopping is real. One of the things I read recently was that farmers in the Midwest and further north are planting more corn and grain, whereas before they weren't. They were doing different kinds of farming. So you've got the kind of food for, we're talking about mallards in particular here, that mallards like. And so, a lot of mallards, they find water nearby, and they've got food where they used to not have it. This is not any one project that any duck conservation effort is involved in. This is just pure farming operations that are very significant and growing in number. You've got a situation there where the mallards are stopping, and the data does suggest that that's happening, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does indicate that, and it is important to point out that this is conventional corn. This isn't necessarily flooded corn in some duck hunting area in, Illinois or Iowa or somewhere. This is conventional farmed corn, just like you see in the Mississippi Delta, except it's up in the upper Midwest, and there's millions of acres of it. And when it's not covered in snow, like in a year like this, up until this hopefully big cold front that we're about to see, it's not covered in snow. So it is available to waterfowl to forage and feed and stick around and stay there instead of flying south to the wintering grounds. So
Yeah.
it is something that we need to pay attention to. Do we have control over that, Ricky? No.
None whatsoever. I think it's important too that you're seeing a growth in hunting operations that do farm their own ducks. I mean, this has been a trend for some time, and so there's been at least some conversation. It actually was brought up in a commission meeting about whether Mississippi should invest in farming operations. But the data is becoming very clear. One of the things that I noted is that a large number of current ducks have some percentage of farm-raised duck in them, and that the data is showing very clearly now that farm-raised ducks or ducks that have some portion of farm-raised don't want to migrate. And so that changes the migration patterns. Is that something DU's talking about?
We're doing a lot of DNA analysis. We're supporting some work, and I think Ramsey mentioned it, and it's been on DU's podcast a bunch of times, that we are supporting a lot of scientific research to identify where our ducks are coming from. We can actually look at or analyze a feather to see if it came from Saskatchewan or Maryland or South Carolina or some other place, some game farm. So we can tell that. We're getting a lot of interest and support from hunters. So hunters are providing feathers to this project. So we are part of that, and we are seeing that there is a lot of detrimental effects to game farm mallards. We've seen it in the Atlantic Flyway, but we're focused on wild migratory birds. We're focused on traditional management practices, supporting programs that we know produce ducks, and that's making sure we have grass and we have water in the prairies. Unfortunately, we have had a drought the last few years, and grasslands continue to be lost, and they are turning into farmland, and there's real reasons for that to happen. But what we can do is protect what's left and make sure that ranchers have places to put their cows, because cows are good for ducks. Grazing is good for ducks. That keeps duck habitat on the ground.
Well, in my conversation, you mentioned Ramsey Russell of GetDucks.com. He has literally a global footprint. He is involved in doing exotic duck hunts all around the world, and he is an advocate for duck hunting. And he's involved, for example, in the anti-hunting effort down in Australia. He's I don't know how Ramsey does what he does, and he does it extraordinarily well. But when on the issue of farming ducks, he was unbelievably critical of any discussion about that, because he just felt like for those who are charged with managing the resource, the last thing we need to be talking about in terms of a statewide effort would be farming ducks. That would, he's been working with the University of Texas in Austin, and talk very specifically about the genetic work that they've been doing down there. And we should pay very close attention to those efforts and other efforts like them that are helping us really understand how does the combination of migratory birds and farm-raised birds result in a duck that will not migrate. And that is a really important problem. And look, here's the thing. We would never be able to farm enough ducks to replace the number of ducks that are in the flyway. So, and I think DU's got to continue to do what you're doing, which is we're going to focus on where the ducks come from and enhancements in the ground. Let me put it that way. Enhancements in the ground that can be made that could facilitate creating more ducks down the flyway. That's where your energy needs to be, improving the habitat and all of that. But the fact that a vote about funding of DU could on our Mississippi State Commission could only win 3-2 with 2 commissioners voting against it, it's concerning. And I think we have to be aligned. I'm not being overly critical, and I'm not trying to bring too much light to that. But if the vote were 3-2 against it, then we would, Mississippi would not be investing in the kind of habitat enhancement that need to be made, because the reality is the ducks from Mississippi come from way up north in North America, and we have to all be aligned around that, and we all have to be aligned around habitat improvements that can be made there and here to enhance the flyway. So, and that's where your energy is, isn't it?
It is. And, one of the wonders and one of the facts about waterfowl management is when you do hold a wild bird in your hand that you harvested, that you called in with your duck call, that you decoyed into your duck hole in the state of Mississippi, you can be confident that that bird came from somewhere else. And if it has a band, you can tell exactly where it was banded. But all of our birds come from elsewhere. They do not come from Mississippi. Wood ducks are the lone exception. We love wood ducks. They're the state duck of Mississippi, but our mallards, other species, they're coming from elsewhere. And that's one of the wonders of waterfowl hunting. And we do depend on hunters to support conservation. We depend on hunters to be part of the data collection process, to be part of science. We have a strong track record of that. And, it is an amazing thing to hold a wild bird in your hands that came from Canada or the Arctic Circle.
Hey, listen, when we come back, after last week's conversation with Ramsey, I got a couple of really interesting questions about the farming of ducks. You may or may not be able to answer, but I'm just curious about, have you heard these questions being raised as potential ways of addressing the problem? When we come back, we'll continue the conversation with Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited. Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I'm my friend Ed Penny, who has tremendous responsibilities for policy in the Southern District of the United States. And he's a real good friend of the show and someone I'll enjoy checking in with from time to time. So on the duck farming thing, just a couple other points. One of the interesting things about being able to extend this show into social media is the opportunity for people to raise questions. And it's like one guy asked a question, so if would mallards that were farmed, that were raised in Mississippi, would they stay in Mississippi? And I guess it's getting to the point that if the ducks aren't going to migrate, mallards aren't going to migrate here anymore, can we just grow our own? What's your thoughts about that?
I think we've got a lot of predators in the state of Mississippi that would be pretty tough on ducks, bobcats, owls, largemouth bass, alligators. They all eat ducks. And what we've seen with wood ducks, and those are species that are adapted and live in Mississippi year round, there's very, very high duckling mortality. It's hard for a duck to survive, number one, because a lot of things like to eat them.
Well, one guy came in and said duck farming isn't the answer to migration. Another guy said this, let's say you raise 50 mallards a year. Gators are going to get 20. Hawks and eagles are going to get 20. 10 may survive. Not worth it. And he said, just add more duck huts for woodies. But it's a really good point, really. I mean, the whole notion of predators and all of that. But it's interesting. People are thinking about it. They want to learn more about it. I mean, a lot of questions about DNA. I see DNA throughout the stream here, and people concerned about this notion that a farm-raised mallard breeding with a migratory mallard, and the fact that could and does. I mean, the science is already suggesting strongly, actually, that does change whether that duck's going to want to migrate or not. These are important points. If we really, really are concerned about the North American wildlife model and the recognition that these birds belong to us, and that we've got that the key to our success is to manage them appropriately. And when it comes to ducks in particular, the loss of habitat. I mean, we can talk about changes in migratory patterns and all this other stuff, but the losses in habitat are the number one issue that we're facing, all the way from the breeding grounds all the way down to the Mississippi Delta and beyond. That is, without a doubt, something we can all agree on, isn't it?
It is, and Mississippi has a strong track record of supporting those habitat conservation efforts throughout the flyway. MDWFP supported, and the commission has supported sending funding to Canada, both through Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl, for habitat-based measures that support breeding ducks. That's securing grasslands, that's protecting wetlands in a voluntary way. This is not regulatory driven. This is willing landowners doing what's right for waterfowl and wetlands. So Mississippi has a track record of success supporting Canada, but also in Mississippi. You know, there are duck stamp dollars that are invested on public lands and on private lands in the state of Mississippi, and DU uses a lot of those dollars to do that too. And, you know, you can't do one or the other, you got to do both. And that's what I always used to say, but it's not sexy, it's not shiny, but you got to support habitat throughout the flyway.
One of the interesting things about the migration patterns that I found interesting in my reading about it is that, 20, 30 years ago, there was a very defined migration pattern for most of the ducks. And what we're seeing now is that in some cases, especially with mallards, that they kind of bounce around a bit. And as a scientist, that's got to be hard to get your arms around it. That instead of having this, really defined migration pattern, this notion that they bounce around, it makes it hard to describe, how we're going to fix it, doesn't it?
It does. And back when I was in Mississippi State learning about waterfowl ecology from Dr. Rick Kaminsky, he used to talk about how ducks are samplers. They sample places, a lot of places, to find out where they can find food and where they can be safe and where they can find a mate. And the most important thing is they want to survive. And what helps them survive the best? We can harvest a few, harvest a surplus, take a few ducks here and there, but we need ducks to fly back north. And it's important to have, again, habitat on public and private lands to support ducks. And we have to keep doing that in Mississippi. I hunted public land yesterday, it was well-managed habitat, but unfortunately the ducks were few. And that's what kind of year it is. And I wish that we could say that we have a lot of ducks like we did in 2015, but duck numbers have gone down. At the breeding level, at the breeding population level, they've gone down. Therefore, we're seeing lower numbers in the state of Mississippi and in Arkansas and Louisiana. The data's showing us that.
Hey, listen, one of the benefits to this land that I mentioned that my good friends hunt at and that I hunt at when I decide to go duck hunting is that it's fairly well fingerprinted for gadwalls and a couple of other species, not necessarily mallards. That may be one of the reasons why the hunts are really good. They had a hunt last weekend where they limited out in less than 10 minutes. And then they watched after that as hundreds of wood ducks. I posted some videos of this at SuperTalk Outdoors. But hundreds of wood ducks and gadwalls are trying to work their way into this hole. So they're lucky. I mean, they're lucky that they've got a place that's like that. And then again, I mentioned the green-winged teal. So, I would say, pintails, we've seen some changes in that. You have to get down to the species level to really appreciate some of this. And our friend Alex Littlejohn made this point that too many people see success as only killing greenheads. And I see success as having a great variety of ducks. Personally, doesn't matter to me which ducks we have. And my friend Mark Creech, incidentally, he's a really kind of a good cooker of wild game in general. But he said he would love to have wood ducks more than anything else because of the nutty flavor and whatever. And I have to sort of agree with him on that. But it is interesting how people define success in duck hunting by just mallards, when they should think more in terms of big ducks and a wonderful variety.
You're right. And my 7-year-old asked me the other day what my favorite duck to eat was, and I told him a green-winged teal, so I'll differ with you on that. But it is absolutely true that success should not be defined just by what we have on our strap. We see a lot of Instagram posts, a lot of Facebook posts with lots of full straps, and that happens sometimes, but it doesn't happen as often as what those influencers would have us believe. it's been a tough duck season, and the folks all around the country are saying exactly the same thing. So relish when it's good, relish a quality hunt. I had one of those earlier this year where we didn't kill limits of ducks, but it was a quality hunt. Ducks didn't leave the hole. We got them. It wasn't many of them, but we had a great hunt with a lot of good friends. Saw my 2-year-old dog working, so that was fun. So there's lots of different ways to measure success besides how much green is on your strap at the end of the hunt.
There's no doubt about it. Hey, listen, in looking at sort of migration patterns of all these species of waterfowl, one of the things that that stands out is that geese. I remember back in the 80s, we used to, when I was at the Sun Herald, we used to bring a group of advertisers down to hunt at, I think the name of the place was the Mallard Lodge. That's what comes to my mind, down in South Louisiana. We had great duck hunts, incidentally, down there, and a lot of folks in that area, incidentally, they talk a lot about how they don't see the species of ducks the way they used to see them. But one of the things you saw a lot of is lots of geese. And one of the things I've noticed in the reading of the migratory changes is that instead of there being, I don't know how many, but lots of geese down in that part of the country, they're actually in the Mississippi Delta now. You're seeing a shift to the Mississippi Delta. And boy, do you see that. I mean, when I'm there, I don't think I've ever seen so many geese out in the fields as I see today. There's some really good geese hunting going on in this state right now, isn't there?
That's true. And geese have changed where they spend the winter. They used to spend it in Texas and Southwest Louisiana. That's been connected to rice. Rice agriculture has declined in those two parts of the South. For a lot of different reasons, but we still have rice in the Mississippi Delta and Arkansas, particularly in Northeast Louisiana. So we are seeing a lot of speckled bellies, white-fronted geese. We're seeing a ton of snow geese, and those are fun to hunt. It's completely different than going out and standing in a duck hole, but it's a lot of fun. And that is one thing that we can point to that is new and different and possibly better than what it used to be.
There's no doubt. I can tell you, again, my friends have gone out and laid in some fields and put out the 250 decoys and send some videos to me, man, during the hunt that knock your socks off. Just so much fun these guys were having as you watch these layers and layers of geese coming in to land literally on top of them. Fun kind of hunting. Hey, listen, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to SuperTalk Outdoors. Appreciate you joining us today as we continue our visit with Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited. And, if we've done nothing else in this show, Ed, I think, we've kind of brought a little bit more attention to how the duck situation is so dynamic in this state. And it used to our focus. I remember back when I was the president of Wildlife Federation and we had the Adopt a Pothole program, that a lot of our attention was simply on increasing the number of eggs that we could produce in North America and Canada and places like that to breed more ducks so we could get more ducks down here. That was where a lot of the focus was. But over the years, boy, it's got a lot more complex than that. And I hope the conversation today is just about helping people understand that there's no one answer, man. It's a very dynamic answer, and it requires folks like Ducks Unlimited and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and folks like our friend Ramsey Russell and so many others to work together, universities and others, to continue to gather lots of data and to keep the focus on what we can do to enhance the migration patterns of ducks. That's where a lot of our focus needs to be. Hey, so before we get done, Ed, why don't you just give us a few examples of some of the work you're doing in Mississippi? I know you're working all across these states for the southern region, but your home state is Mississippi, and you guys are doing some great projects with the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Give us a couple of examples of those.
Yeah, Ricky, thank you for mentioning that and giving me a chance to talk about it. Like I said, the Prairie Pothole region is absolutely our continental priority for Ducks Unlimited, but Mississippi is also included, close second, because the lower Mississippi Valley is a level 1 priority. And it is supported by science. And that's why we work in Mississippi. It's not because I live here, because our Southern Regional Office is based in the Jackson area, but we are investing in the state of Mississippi and on our public lands in particular. places that I like to hunt, places that that a lot of Mississippians hunt. And in particular, the Mississippi Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund, which we've talked about a lot over the last few years, and we hope to continue to see support this legislative session by this new legislature. No reason to think otherwise. But we are investing trust fund dollars with Ducks Unlimited dollars on public lands at Mahana Wildlife Management Area, Howard Miller WMA. So we are doing work there where hunters can see it. And it's taking, again, those state dollars through the trust fund. It's taking some matching funds from Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. And we're taking DU dollars and putting it all into one pot and doing work on the ground to make better habitat here in the state for Mississippi duck hunters.
Listen, Ed, we all work so closely together on the Mississippi Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund, but it is awesome to see it in action. The matching funds are there and they're growing. The number of projects that have been funded have been phenomenal. The number of projects that are waiting in line, waiting to be funded are significant. But we're just getting started, and already significant improvements are being made in our outdoor enjoyment in this state. And the fact that we're able to leverage the dollars, turn into $3 or $4, $1 that Mississippi puts into it, and seeing the commitment of the lieutenant governor. We look forward to working with the new speaker and the legislature I think eventually, hopefully we can get some energy around a sustainable revenue source so we don't have to do this on an annual basis. But regardless, I mean, we've hit the ground running and good things are happening in this state as a result. It's everything we hoped it would be, isn't it?
It is. It's beyond our wildest dreams to see how successful it's been. We got $10 million the first year. I think that there were $100 million in requests for that $10 million. They're working on spending the second $15 million, and I think they got about $70 million in requests. So the demand is there for more and better funding for outdoor projects here in the state.
And the quality of the projects. Now, of course, the more people become aware of it. It could be local governments. It could be conservation organizations. One of the great things about having folks like Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited, and others at the table is you can see what other states were doing. How are they leveraging their funds? How are they creating as many dollars as possible from the matching components to be able to make a project really go and make it viable? It's exciting to see this. And the other thing I should point out is that. I think that the board of trustees for the trust fund has been terrific. I mean, they hit the ground running. They had to form an organization. They had to hire an executive director, and Ricky Flint, who was the guy who ultimately got that job. And they had to do a lot of requests for proposals from people and communicate. They had a lot of work to do to evaluate the proposals and make decisions, so there would be a nice balance. They wanted to do some small projects. They wanted to do some big projects. They didn't want all the money going in one place, but they wanted to do some big projects so they could do something that was going to be impactful. So it's been great to watch. And I appreciate your leadership on that issue. I know you're proud, as I am, to kind of see it all come into fruition. Hey, listen, Ed, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend.
Great to see you, Ricky, and I appreciate all you're doing for the outdoors in Mississippi, for our conservation work. It's important to point out that how important our scientific foundation is and how important hunting is for continued conservation, and we are and will remain leaders in that.
I can't agree more. God bless you, my friend, and thank you for your leadership. Have a great week. We'll see you next week, and stay safe when you're in the outdoors. Always stay safe. We'll see you. God bless you.